have to buy the book. So I'll skip ahead a little bit here to he's telling the story of his first day in class, imitating Professor Timothy Wallace. On the first day of class, I threw on an old corduroy blazer and a button-down shirt and went uptown to the university. 35 eager freshman faces sized me up as I walked into the room. "He seems young," I heard someone whisper. "Is this a joke?" someone else asked. I began to sweat and flush red as they snickered. Standing there before their doubting eyes, something in me finally snapped. With all the rage only an unappreciated genius could muster, I slammed a stack of syllabi on the table. "Who knows how much tuition costs at this school?" I thundered. No one raised a hand. Everyone sat up straight, even the jocks in the back. "Why am I not surprised?" I muttered. Truth be told, I didn't know myself. I let out a companionable laugh. Only 2 students in the room dared to smile back. "If you want to learn about journalism, you're not going to do it sitting in a classroom," I barked. "Everybody stand up. You have 25 minutes. Go out into the city streets, find someone to interview, and get their life story. In exactly 25 minutes, come back here and be prepared to tell me everything there is to know about your subject. I'll be quizzing you on the details." No one moved. One of the students who had smiled raised her hand. She at least was zipping up her bag. "What if you ask us about something that we don't find out?" "Then you make it up," I said. "But if I don't believe you, you fail." A few more people began sliding their notebooks into their bags. A boy with a Mets cap on backwards raised his hand. "Isn't that what you call unethical? Isn't that like plagiarism?" "No," I said flatly. "Plagiarism is when you steal someone else's words and pass them off as your own. When you just make it up from nothing, it's called fiction. We'll discuss the difference more thoroughly when you all get back. Now, you have 24 minutes. 5 or 6 people jumped up and bolted for the door. "Professor," one girl called out. "Professor, I forget your name?" "Timothy Wallace," I said as I wrote it on the board in big chalk letters. "Yeah, ain't you even going to take attendance?" "I'll take attendance when you come back," I said coolly, taking my jacket off and slinging it over my chair. Checking my gleaming gold wristwatch, I said, "If you come back, 23 minutes. With that, I sat down and watched the students file out, looking at me as if I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. All I knew was that I was someone that I did not recognize, but it felt right. I liked me this way. And 23 minutes later, every one of the 35 students was back with pages of scribbled notes, all fighting to read first. The rest is the rest. Timothy's backup plan became mine, and with a little practicing of the scribble he called the signature, I started cashing his paychecks and paying his bills. At one time, I suppose I planned to get a teaching job of my own with my own name, but a strange thought came back to me, which had first surfaced in those dark, drunk days in July after my novel had failed to sell. I'd been pondering my chosen vocation, to write fiction and to slant the truth, and to tell lies for a living, but I wasn't good enough at it. At least not in writing yet. No one believed me. The best novelists make you believe as you read that their stories are real. You hold your breath as Raskolnikov approaches his neighbor with a raised axe. You weep when no one comes to Gatsby's funeral. And when you realize you are being so well fooled, you love the author all the more for it. Up in front of my students each day as Professor Timothy Wallace, I discovered the thrill of getting away with the manufacturing of reality. I had a way not only to pay the bills, but to become a better purveyor of make-believe. I had put myself into an evolutionary situation wherein my failure to deceive would result in disaster, wherein I'd be forced to risk everything, where I'd be rewarded for my successes at dishonesty. And the greatest reward was that I barely thought of my old life anymore. For a time, I really believed I was Professor Timothy Wallace, so much so that one day, when I opened the mailbox to discover that the United States of America was proud to accept Timothy Wallace's credentials for dual citizenship, I felt genuine relief as if I were the one avoiding deportation. I signed Timothy's name on the dotted lines as if it were my very own. I tell you, at that time, I'd all but forgotten that it wasn't. A few weeks later, when I went down to Hudson Street and collected a crisp blue passport, it hardly occurred to me that I was committing a federal crime. I bought myself a hot dog afterwards to celebrate. I'd made something of myself, or someone's self anyway. I was actually a wonderful teacher, if I only channeled equal parts Mr. Cotter, Full Metal Jacket, and Professor Keating from Dead Poets Society. At the end of the first semester, my students filled out their Scantron evaluations of my performance, deeming me excellent with the unanimity of graphite. Over the holiday break, I dug out the old novella I had written, and for the first time, it felt more like fiction than fact. When I returned to my post for the spring, I took on 4 new sections. This time, the students were expecting the theatrics. They had heard about me, it seemed. They had heard about the professor who tells it like it is. The brilliance of teaching for a large university department is that it involves surprisingly little oversight. If I'd tried to be a middle school teacher, I'd have been fired in a heartbeat. Little children still tell their parents what they do at school all day. The Department of Education hands down a curriculum and textbooks, and any deviation from the prescribed course is noted. But at the university, oversight only came once a semester, when a member of the tenured faculty materialized to sit in on my class. And this faculty member was required to give advance notice, so it was simple to merrily plan more mundane and traditional activities for that day. The students played along, happy to help me in damning the man. In the end, my flaw was that I was really too good. My name came to the chair's attention when I was overwhelmingly voted Teacher of the Year by the freshman class. This lifted my name out of the crowd of nearly 100 adjunct professors, and in that same night, when the chair saw the real Timothy Wallace on BBC reporting on corruption in the UN Foreign Aid Program, he finally put two and two together. My little conversation with the chair in the hallway was uninteresting. He called me a sociopath, which I'll admit did sting, but otherwise, he simply seemed flabbergasted that I had so thoroughly charmed the hundreds of university students in my charge. An uninspired dinosaur himself, he asked me more than a few times, none to my surprise, how I'd done it. I'm sure you'd like to know the same, so here's the truth. Students want you to tell them that everything they've learned thus far has been bullshit, served up steaming by people far stupider than themselves. They've all made it through high school, where they're guaranteed to have encountered worthless instructors of all kinds, peddling information that has not even the slightest relevance to their lives at all. So, first things first, you tell them that their suspicions have been correct all along. Most of what they avoided learning was not all that important anyway. Then comes the right hook, now that their guards have been dropped. What is the one thing that is valuable in this world? The ability to lie. That's right, and they know it well by then, only no one has acknowledged it to their faces before. Language, you go on to explain, is not a boring and worthless system of grammar and spelling, but a tool that can be used to manipulate the weak and the stupid. Students sit up straight in their chairs when they hear this. A master of the English language, you go on, can convince and manipulate anyone into doing anything the master pleases. You show them Socrates. They know him as just some ancient dead guy. No. You show them a man who uses his superior wit to convince ordinary people to think exactly the way he wants them to think. You show them speeches by Stalin and Marx, JFK and FDR. You look at the Gettysburg Address. Don't quiz them on the year and the date. They know that's what Wikipedia is for. They can get that on their cell phones. My favorite lesson plan involves simply walking over to the TV and turning on CNN for an hour. At any time of day, even in commercial breaks, the students can identify an endless stream of manipulation. The truth being bent constantly into lies right before our eyes and ears every day of our lives, and they are hip to this fact. Change the channel to MTV, and they can see their idols doing the same thing. Pop singers who reinvent themselves to seem like the girl next door in one interview and little better than porn stars in the video that follows. Or rappers who back their words with claims of rough streets so that we'll forget their bank account balances are in the triple millions. And the students idolize these frauds. They dress like them and speak like them because they're frauds. They're heroes because they're good frauds. And the students reinvent themselves as ever better miniatures of their fraudulent role models. Of course, you will occasionally find a young, idealistic kid who believes that art contains truth. This may seem initially to be anathema to your entire being, but these rare souls are even easier to win over. For you will deliver your speeches with amusement, but also with grave concern. Your passion bursts from the heart, which you will wear on your corduroy jacket sleeve, and it runs, blood red, down your jeans and onto your Italian leather shoes. Never take your eyes off these genuine students, for they have not yet been crushed, and you will not crush them. You will nurture this idea that there is truth and beauty behind that veil of lies. Indeed, whenever you draw back that curtain, you will show them that there is good, and there is right, and there is better than, and there is best. And if you tell this lie well enough, you may even begin to believe it again yourself. You may even regain a sliver of the innocence and ignorance you treasured once too, and this is your reward at the end of the day. But there I go again. Sometimes I forget I'm not in my classroom anymore. I'll get to the end, finally, and explain how I got from my classroom to Dubai. The department chair fired off some empty threats about getting the police involved, but I knew he would never do this because it would require him to admit the truth about the university's lack of oversight to hundreds of parents and maybe even real reporters. So I told him to do what he liked, and I walked downstairs. Stepping out onto the rainy streets of New York, I wondered where to go next. A long summer stretched ahead. The downside was, of course, that they wouldn't let me teach at any other city universities now, and I couldn't exactly put my experience of the previous year on a CV. The economy was in the toilet. I was about to turn 30. I was unemployed, friendless, and loveless. My sole possessions were the disaster of my forced, unbelievable, and less than charming novella, and the knowledge that I'd spent the better part of a year being someone I actually enjoyed being instead of myself, and I'd be damned if I was going to go back. Just then I noticed Saeed, my favorite student, hovering under the awning smoking a hand-rolled cigarette. The golden tobacco smelled sweet, like dark secrets, and when he saw me looking over, Saeed happily offered me one. "Where did you say you were going next year? Hunter? NYU? Columbia?" "The University of Dubai," Saeed declared proudly. "Ah, good old UDoob," I said, though I had never heard a thing about it before. "My father knows some people who teach there," Saeed explained. "You'd like it there. The people in the Middle East, they all want to know, what is America really? You know, Professor, you tell it like it is. You do not pretend this country is perfect and pure and wonderful. You can tell them." "America might not be perfect," I said, not really thinking, "but I've always thought it must be a hell of a lot better than anywhere else." Truth was, I'd never left the country before. My father told me that I had to come to America to see for myself just what the rest of the world wants so badly to be, Saeed said with a smile. "With all due respect, Professor, how do you know you won't like Dubai better?" "I read a lot," I said, giving him a warm, authoritative pat on the shoulder, enough to know that I don't want to be in the Middle East at this particular moment in history. "But you said yourself in class, Professor, these things are not all the truth. United Arab Emirates is a friendly, peaceful, democratic country, just like America." "Our partners in peace," I said with a wry smile. He looked back at me, for the first time as a fellow human being, and not just my student, and he laughed. "My father, perhaps he can talk to a friend? They pay a lot of money for American professors in my country." And that is how I found myself boarding Emirates Flight 24 with Timothy Wallace's American passport in one hand. As I checked the time on my gold wristwatch, I looked up to see a row of polished clocks, each set to different hours around the world. I'd gotten a little drunk, insurance against the long flight ahead, and so I saluted as I passed the men in army fatigues with guns the size of me. The sight of them was quickly replaced by the vision of my flight attendant, all almond eyes and smooth coffee-colored skin. Her name tag said Scheherazade, and she graciously ushered me into the first-class cabin. Saeed's father had been generous enough to supply a ticket. "Professor, please make yourself comfortable." She pulled open a small divider, and I peered into what was set up as a miniature luxury hotel room. I ran my hands over the swirling walnut burl of the countertop, opening a small compartment to find, to my great relief, a fully stocked minibar. My seat was folded down into what resembled a snug twin-size bed with 450 thread-count sheets and a silk comforter. A wide, flat-panel television invited me to surf hundreds of channels, browse the internet, or plug an iPod into a smartly concealed receptacle. I set my bags in the spacious storage area and lifted the remote control. Scanning through the guide, I felt like the commander of a futuristic battleship, the world at my fingertips, more a part of the next century than the current one. I scrolled through the Buddha Channel, MTV Brazil, Fashion International, Szechuan BabyNet, Radio Television Luxembourg. "Is your suite prepared to your liking?" the attendant asked. "Am I still on a plane?" I gasped. "Yes, sir," she answered with a smile. "How much does this cost?" I asked. "I have no idea, sir," she replied. "It's about 12 round trip," came a voice from behind Scheherazade. An adjacent panel slid open, and I found myself eye to eye with a harried-looking businessman, already half into a miniature bottle of scotch. "All this for 1,200, I said, looking back at my bedchamber. 12,000, the man said casually. Taking my cue from him, I coolly suppressed my shock at the statement. "Right, 12,000, that's what I meant." The man smiled at me as Scheherazade excused herself to board the rest of the passengers. "Gene Packard," the man said, extending a hand. "Nice to meet you, son." I was suddenly wishing I had gotten dressed up for the flight. Mr. Packard was wearing a golden, silk-backed wool vest and gleaming tie to match. I was wearing my usual teaching gear, a pair of Italian shoes, some dark blue jeans, and my thrift store blazer, with a shirt I had meant to iron. Packard seemed to note this, for he said, "You know, they'll press that for you." "Of course," I said. "That's why I didn't press it before. I might as well have it done fresh." "What's your line?" Packard asked, pouring me a scotch without asking. "I'm in journalism." "Well, you're headed to the right place," Packard said with a wink. "The future is in Dubai just as soon as I'm standing here before you." After takeoff, over several scotches, Packard told me the whole story of Dubai. One of 7 emirates that banded together when the British left the Gulf in the late 70s, Dubai had made its place in the world in the expected way, by peddling shitloads of oil and petroleum to freedom-loving countries such as our own, keeping profits high by relying primarily on underpaid and often violated South Asian workers. But in recent years, the forward-thinking emirate realized the inevitable endgame of the oil business, something that America, despite Al Gore's admonitions and the recent rash of celebrities espousing greenness, had collectively failed to realize. There's simply not enough oil to go around forever. So Dubai decided that while the rest of the world continued slaughtering one another over who'd get the finite amount of oil that remained, they would diversify their portfolios. Dubai turned into a playground for the wealthy, particularly those in Europe, featuring 7-star hotels, man-made islands, and even indoor ski slopes. If there was one thing that a lifetime in the oil business taught an emirate, said Packard, it was that people are addicted to opulence. A growing number of American businesses came to set up shop in the new Silicon Valley, where Microsoft, IBM, Oracle, and the EMC Corporation were merrily cashing in on expansive tax-free zones. Packard assumed I was headed just down the block to where CNN, Reuters, and the Associated Press had all set up their own offices of late. All these people here, Packard said, motioning to one of his 3 cabin windows. I could see the New York skyline clearly against the horizon still, and I silently bid it adieu. They think they're living in the center of the universe, but we're headed to the real McCoy. And it's funny, but looking down at all those hard lines of Manhattan, the grids of streets and office windows all getting smaller and smaller, I felt as if I had evolved, after all, not just into Timothy Wallace, but into someone cleverer and more confident. Up and down Park Avenue and along Canal Street scurried millions who felt that they had the grit of the real world beneath their fingernails. Because they were making it there, they assumed they could be making it anywhere. And in the blare of taxi horns and the roar of subway tunnels, they bought and sold, networked and dialogued, listened to NPR on podcasts, and read the headlines off the New York Times website. It was the city where I'd written my first novel, and where my first real friendships had flourished, grown ripe, and eventually rotted. I'd come to it as a stranger, only to learn its every avenue and alleyway. But from a few thousand feet up, I could see that it was all just a little island in a vast and unfamiliar landscape. On the plasma screen in my suite, I could see the city I was bound for, Dubai, self-proclaimed land of make-believe, a city with ski slopes in the desert and sheiks in limousines, a city where the hotels kept leopards in cages in their lobbies and gave themselves 7 stars out of 5, a city where no one expected anything to be true. But all of that is another story, and I can see you are getting tired. Get your wife to bed. There is a lot to see and do around here. Maybe we'll meet again tomorrow, and I'll continue with the truth. Or maybe I won't. Would you know, either way? Would you care, truly? Or perhaps I'll be long gone by then, who can say? We're all just travelers, after all, telling stories, passing time. Get some rest, then. Tomorrow could bring anything. Al-Wada. Good night. Thanks.